Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. There's been a huge conversation about the movie It Ends With Us, and many of you have been asking whether it's actually any good. Some of you who are deeply invested in the story haven't even seen the film yet, but you're curious because it involves Hollywood's elite, people who, for all intents and purposes, are clashing over a movie. For some of us, it's hard to relate to their level of wealth and influence, or even the issues they're fighting about. But at the same time, we can all recognize the dynamics at play, the controversy surrounding whether or not it involved sexual harassment, the battles over creative direction, film edits, and so much more. One thing we haven't really discussed is the critical response and how it actually played a role in the backlash against Blake Lively. I haven't taken a deep dive into what the critics had to say or how the film's release sparked a lot of this drama. But for Blake Lively, she's claiming that there was some kind of digital smear campaign where social media was manipulated to shape public opinion. She even provided text messages from Jen Ale and Melissa Nathan to support her claims of an online attack. But at the core of it all, this situation started with the film's release and its premiere, which generated major buzz. Conversations erupted on TikTok, Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, and even within Colleen Hoover's dedicated fan groups, where people couldn't stop talking about everything surrounding this film.
And it is not the movie for you to don your florals, grab your besties, and go in for a cute little rom-com, okay? Like, take it seriously. This is not a lighthearted movie.
It's too real. And there are too many people that are the real life Lily Blooms of the world that have to deal with that every single day.
If Justin Baldoni is not the person who he says he is, with all of the charities that he's been involved with, his podcast, and his delicate approach to bringing this hard and difficult story to life, I mean, he's the only one in this press tour who has been putting the spotlight on the real dangers of domestic violence. Come on, you're telling me that the guy that did this interview, you aren't messing with him?
I do kind of feel like the press for it though is a bit like, I don't want to say tone deaf, right, but I just feel like I've watched a lot of interviews and stuff, they're not really touching on the domestic violence part, and it makes me worried that people who have went through that will watch this film and don't know that it's about domestic violence, because apparently it doesn't have any trigger warnings at the start, and it probably should.
Does anybody else feel like the trailers, the press, the overall vibe, It Ends With Us, is giving flowers and happiness and chick flick, romantic comedy, everything that this movie is probably not going to be about?
And then it was also in the media because everyone was at the premiere. Clips of the premiere were shown. They were promoting the film. There was tons of interviews coming out. And then on top of that, as the film starts being seen by people, then
then it became a big media story because everyone was at the premiere. Clips from the pre-premiere were shown, the film was heavily promoted, and tons of interviews were coming out. On top of that, as more people started watching the movie, online discussions exploded, with audiences sharing their thoughts. Unfortunately, the film wasn't well received. I'd call it a mix of reactions, but overall, it was a hot mess. Major outlets published critical reviews, pointing out several key issues with the film, from how it depicted domestic violence to the editing choices, music selection, pacing, structure, and overall storytelling. Going into this premiere, the film had two possible outcomes. It was either going to be a massive success, riding on the popularity of Colleen Hoover's best-selling book, or it was going to spark controversy. And even before the movie, the book itself had already faced backlash. While it had a huge reader base, many criticized the way it handled domestic violence, with some accusing Colleen Hoover of shamelessly promoting it. About a year before the film's release, she even launched an It Ends With Us adult coloring book, which only fueled the controversy. One of the biggest issues with this movie's promotion was its identity. It wasn't a romantic comedy, nor was it just a dramatic thriller. It tackled serious themes like domestic violence, but didn't quite fit into any single genre. No matter how it was marketed, it was always going to be a challenge. But beyond the marketing struggles, the film's critical reception played a major role in shaping the online backlash against Blake Lively. She wants people to believe her. criticism was solely due to social media manipulation, but professional critics from well-respected outlets had their own independent takes on the film that weren't driven by online trends. For example, The Hollywood Reporter, typically neutral on such matters, published a headline on August 20th that read, "It Ends With Us Should Have Warned Audiences. It's time for movies to take a page from TV shows and properly alert viewers about sensitive content." This wasn't just a random opinion, it was written by an executive director from the Network of Victim Recoveries of DC. Advocacy groups supporting domestic violence survivors started speaking out, criticizing how the film failed to provide proper trigger warnings. Many viewers, especially those unfamiliar with the book, had no idea the story revolved around an abusive relationship, making the lack of transparency in its promotion incredibly problematic. A lavish penthouse to designer fashion feels at odds with the film's intended message. The biggest issue critics had with It Ends With Us was how it handled domestic violence in its marketing and storytelling. By failing to provide any content warnings before the film started, it ultimately failed the very survivors it was supposed to support. One of the most pointed criticisms from an expert working with victims was that there was no trigger warning. No resources provided for those affected, and no indication beforehand that the film contained such heavy themes. The way it was marketed misled audiences, which could be particularly harmful for someone expecting a rom-com, but instead being confronted with traumatic content. The responsibility falls on filmmakers and studios to ensure audiences aren't misled, and in this case, they failed. Blake Lively has suggested that her backlash was the result of a social media smear campaign, but the idea that every major news outlet and critic was influenced by online dogpiling is pretty far-fetched. Even if some social media manipulation was at play, which I personally doubt, it wouldn't have impacted the opinions of industry professionals and experts. Take the Associated Press, for example. It's one of the largest news organizations in the US, and its review of the film was absolutely scathing. Film critic Mark Kennedy, who reviewed it, was extremely disappointed with the overall execution. He specifically pointed out that the movie tried to balance themes of domestic violence within a rom-com and a female empowerment narrative. But ultimately, all aspects suffered. It leaned too far into melodrama, attempting to tackle topics like abuse, homelessness, generational trauma, and even unintended pregnancy, but never fully developing any of them. Instead, these heavy themes felt hollow and underexplored. He also criticized how the film took too long to establish Ryle as an abuser. His red flags weren't obvious until much later in the story, which diluted the emotional impact. Instead of making him clearly problematic from the start, the film initially frames him as a romantic lead, which is very different from how the book presented his character. Another key critique was the film's pacing, which dragged across its 2-hour runtime. There were too many musical montages, a disjointed structure, and awkwardly cut scenes that left viewers confused about what was happening. Interestingly, those montage-heavy moments weren't the director's creative decision. They were choices made by Blake Lively, who had a significant influence on the film's final edit. Yet, because his name was attached to the project as director, he ended up taking the blame for its flaws. Kennedy also reviewed Lively's performance, saying she was fine, but teetered dangerously close to the manic pixie dream girl trope. Her character was defined by flower sketches, a love for shabby chic aesthetics, and quirky romantic moments, but lacked depth until the film's final act. The script by Christy Hall also faced criticism, with clunky dialogue and odd creative choices, like shifting Lily's father's funeral into a flashback rather than recreating it as an emotional, in-the-moment scene. The biggest issue? The film simply didn't know when to end. At over 2 hours, it dragged on with unnecessary tangents, inconsistent editing, and scenes that felt completely out of place. For example, the rom-com-style karaoke and dance sequences made the movie feel like a cheesy 90s romance, which clashed with the much darker themes it was supposed to explore. The domestic violence scenes were also confusing, making it unclear to the audience whether Ryle's actions were accidental or intentional. The way the film structured these moments made it seem like a shocking twist rather than a gradual, heartbreaking realization, which made the storytelling feel hollow. Fans of the book also pointed out how much of Lily's agency was stripped away in the adaptation. In the novel, she recognizes the red flags, takes steps to protect herself, and even supports Ryle in getting help. But in the film, these key moments were completely cut, leaving audiences with a version of Lily that feels disconnected from the character they originally connected with. Kennedy's review also highlighted several bizarre inconsistencies, like how Lily somehow gains access to the rooftop of a luxury high-rise, or why Jenny Slate's character, despite wearing Valentino and carrying an expensive designer purse, is working in retail. The film's adoration of wealth and luxury, flashy cars, high-end fashion, and a glamorous penthouse felt entirely at odds with its supposed message about domestic violence and survival. The film's obsession with wealth, million-dollar apartments, extravagant dinners, and designer outfits feels like an attempt to show that domestic violence isn't limited to working-class environments, but it comes across as out of touch. Another issue critics pointed out was Lily's love interests. Both are dark-haired, muscular men who favor black t-shirts, have stubble, and adore her. When they argue, it's hard to tell them apart, and when Lily and Ryle finally hook up, she warns him, "Don't let me regret this." Of course she will. And so will others involved in this film. That wasn't a positive review. It was a clear message that this movie is a cliché stacked on top of another cliché, disguised as a rom-com. The film lacks depth, and the chaotic storylines don't connect in a meaningful way. Blake Lively insisted that the movie had a clear beginning, middle, and end. But critics disagreed. One of the biggest complaints was the poor editing, excessive use of music, and the film's bloated runtime, all creative decisions made by Lively. Another brutal review came from Pajiba, a well-respected film and TV review site. They called the film a tonal mess. The serious nature of the subject matter wasn't handled properly, and the film didn't seem to understand how to balance its themes. Their review, published on August 12th after seeing the film, pointed out a major issue: the marketing misled audiences. If someone saw the trailer and thought it was a rom-com, they wouldn't be at fault for believing so. The fact that the plot revolves around a woman falling into an abusive relationship should have been made clearer. Instead, the film tried to be sexy, emotional, comedic, and tragic all at once. The review also argued that, if done well, the movie's chaotic nature could have reflected the unpredictable reality of abusive relationships. But instead, it felt like a mismatched collection of tones that made the funny moments unfunny and the emotional ones feel shallow. That's not just some random person online saying this. This was a professional film critic's take. Lively's performance didn't do her any favors either. She's a talented actress who shines in the right roles, like in A Simple Favor, but here, she struggled. There were a few moments where she captured Lily's internal fear with a forced smile, but most of the time, the script worked against her. And since she rewrote a lot of it, that's on her. The film stripped away key parts of Lily's character, leaving her as little more than a woman defined by her pain. Things happen to her, but we don't get a deep sense of who she really is. Bonet, who played Ryle, stood out more, probably because, as the review pointed out, the film seemed more focused on the abuser's emotional journey than the victim's. That's a signature move from Colleen Hoover. In the book, Hoover romanticized Ryle to make him likable, creating the illusion of a perfect man with a dark side. He has that classic bad boy charm, the kind of guy who believes violence solves everything. But while the story wraps up in a conveniently neat way, it doesn't do justice to his arc. Even worse, he was far more compelling to watch than Atlas. Played by Brandon Sklenar, whose performance felt disappointingly flat. One major problem was that the film never seemed truly committed to depicting domestic violence with the care and empathy it deserved. There were a few moments where the camera lingered on Lily's face after she was hit, showing how her world changed in an instant. But those moments were rare. Instead, the film's aesthetic leaned more toward a perfume commercial than a raw, indie drama. It spent more time on steamy romance and an unnecessary love triangle rather than fully exploring the generational cycle of abuse. Lily's mother, played by Amy Morton, was barely present, which weakened the film's central message. The entire point of the story, how abuse is a pattern that affects entire families, was lost. For a film that runs over 2 hours, it's surprising that crucial details were left out while unnecessary banter remained. Blake Lively, personally, added that extra dialogue to make the film feel funnier, but it only contributed to the criticism. When you break down the negative reviews, a lot of the issues, poor editing, odd music choices, forced humor, and the misleading rom-com marketing, were direct results of her creative decisions, not Justin Baldoni's. Ultimately, these missteps, led to a film that struggled to balance its serious subject matter with its lighthearted tone. One review summed it up by saying, "It ends with us fails because its source material does." It exists within an industry where stories about abuse are marketed as steamy romance, complete with themed merch like coloring books and nail polish. While the core of an important story was there, misguided creative choices smothered it at every turn. And this wasn't just the opinion of random internet users. These were professional critics analyzing the film with a trained eye. When you compare what critics said with how audiences reacted, the patterns are undeniable. Professional reviewers and everyday viewers echoed the same frustrations. Yet, instead of addressing the film's flaws, some people pushed a narrative that criticism wasn't valid, that audiences were overreacting to the marketing, or that behind-the-scenes drama was the real issue. But the truth is, if the film had been better, if it had handled the subject matter with more care, if the marketing had been honest, if the editing and soundtrack had met expectations, there wouldn't have been such intense backlash. Instead, the film had glaring plot holes, unnecessary subplots, and a general lack of cohesion. And when people started voicing these concerns, the conversation quickly shifted away from the film itself to speculation about a feud between Lively and Baldoni. What's clear is that their creative differences didn't end with production. They carried over into how the film was received. Lively framed the situation as a chaotic production gone wrong, while Baldoni insisted it was a creative dispute over direction. But here's the reality. This film was doomed from the start. Even if you remove Lively and Baldoni from the equation, It Ends With Us was always going to face major criticism because the book itself is deeply flawed. Colleen Hoover's characters are problematic. Her handling of abusive relationships has been widely debated, and her storytelling choices raise serious concerns. Lily never reports Ryle to the police, never files a complaint, and the book portrays shared custody as a standard outcome even when domestic violence is involved. These issues go beyond just a bad film adaptation. They're baked into the story itself. The film barely touches on therapy, resources, or the real struggles of leaving an abusive relationship. That's not the reality most survivors face, and it's a crucial element that was overlooked. Another key issue is the danger women face after they leave. So, regardless of who directed, starred in, or produced it, this movie was always going to get mixed reviews, and that's because of the source material. If you want to understand the controversy, you have to start with the book itself, written by Colleen Hoover. It was her creative choice to tell the story this way. And as much as Justin Baldoni believes it's compelling and impactful, plenty of readers disagree. Over the years, frustration toward Colleen Hoover has only grown. By the time this film was finally released, the environment surrounding it was already hostile. TikTok was flooded with videos criticizing her, calling for her cancellation, and pointing out serious issues with her books. So, backlash was inevitable. Fans were upset about the changes made to the book, the way the characters were portrayed, and how the sensitive subject matter was handled. No matter how this movie was made, it was bound to spark heated debate. Blake Lively made the choice to take over a significant part of this film, shaping it into something she felt was her own. And there's plenty of footage from the pre-screening that proves just how much control she had over the final product. The criticisms surrounding the movie, whether about the editing, the music, or the overall execution, are hers to own. That's the responsibility that comes with stepping into a leadership role, even if she wasn't officially credited as the director. When you take creative control, you own both the success and the failure. At the pre-screening, she openly admitted the film wasn't finished. She told fans to ignore things like visible tape on the walls and an incomplete score, assuring them everything would be fixed by the official release. She even encouraged people to see it again on August 9th, saying it would be an improved version. But when asked about the film, Justin Baldoni admitted he hadn't even seen the final cut. Meanwhile, Lively kept making jokes, repeatedly bringing up Brandon's appearance and mentioning how they had to use CGI to fix certain scenes. During the press tour, she seemed obsessed with highlighting Brandon's body, even making him show off his butt in every theater they visited. And let's not forget, she showed an unfinished version of this movie to 200 fans at Book Bonanza on June 16th, despite the studio pushing back against it. She fully owned the editing choices, the soundtrack, and the entire creative direction. So when the film was finally released and the biggest criticisms were about those exact things, it was impossible to shift the blame elsewhere. The editing is all over the place. The music choices don't land well, and the romance montages feel forced and awkward. The pacing is messy, with quick cuts between scenes that lack smooth transitions. The film's length is a common complaint, along with unresolved storylines that leave audiences frustrated. All of that falls on her. If you're going to take full control as the director, producer, and PGA of a film, essentially stealing it from him, then you have to take responsibility for its flaws. She publicly called it her film, so if professional critics and paid journalists are unimpressed, that's on her. Now, she wants people to believe that the backlash is some kind of conspiracy, that Justin is behind it as retaliation for the allegations against him. But let's be real, Justin has zero reason to trash her online. Doing so would only hurt his film's success, even if he wasn't responsible for the final edit. His studio still financed it, so stirring up negativity would just hurt him financially. There is literally no logical incentive for him to start this kind of criticism. Forget conspiracy theories. Just look at the facts and see where everything actually stands. So, what did you think of the film? Did you watch it? Were you a Colleen Hoover fan before, or has this changed your opinion? Would you buy another one of her books, or even consider watching her next adaptation, knowing how badly this one was handled? This isn't about bot farms or online drama. These are real critiques of a poorly executed movie. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's discuss. And before you go, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Over 60% of you watching still haven't subscribed, so don't forget to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys!